I was used to long drives, but that night felt different. I had just left work at 9 p.m., tired from the endless meetings, the pressure of deadlines, and the fact that I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. I had to drive from upstate New York to a small town in North Carolina for 2 job interviews that could change my life. I wasn't going to fly. Flying was too expensive, and frankly, I needed the time alone on the road to clear my mind before the interviews. The job offer I was chasing meant a lot: better benefits, better weather, better everything. It would give me the fresh start I desperately needed. The drive was long, over 8 hours in total, but I was determined. By the time I hit the road, it was already getting dark. I stopped briefly to grab a coffee, hoping the caffeine would keep me sharp as I pushed through the night. I knew I had to make good time, but as the hours wore on, I could feel myself growing more and more tired. I was about 2 hours from my destination when I saw him. It was a strange figure standing alone on the shoulder of the highway. At least it looked like a man. Dressed in a dark suit, his posture was unnervingly rigid, like he was waiting for something or someone. I glanced at him as I sped past, my headlights briefly illuminating his form. But as my car moved forward, I noticed something unsettling: his face. It wasn't just a quick glance. I was aware enough to see his eyes lock onto my car as I passed by, his head turning slowly to follow me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I shook it off. "It's nothing," I muttered aloud to myself, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe he was just a hitchhiker or someone stranded. But as the minutes passed, the image of his face lingered in my mind. Less than 10 minutes later, I saw another man standing on the side of the highway. This one was also wearing a suit, eerily similar to the first. My heart skipped a beat. What were the odds? 2 men, in the middle of nowhere, standing on the side of the highway, both wearing suits. My mind raced. Was it a coincidence? Or was something off? I slowed my car down, thinking maybe I should pull over and check if they needed help. But as I looked in my rearview mirror, something stopped me. The second man was gone. Just like that, vanished without a trace. No sign of him at all. I sped up, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind swirling with confusion. Maybe it was the fatigue. Maybe I was imagining things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided I needed a break. The exhaustion was starting to catch up with me, and I was in desperate need of more coffee. A small rest stop came into view, and I pulled in, hoping a hot cup would revive me. I walked inside the dimly lit building and grabbed a cup of coffee, the warm steam offering a slight relief to my drained body. But as I stepped outside, I froze. There, under a single flickering light, stood the first man again, the same man I had seen earlier on the side of the road. I could hardly breathe. I couldn't stop staring at him. He was standing perfectly still, facing me with that same unsettling expression. His dark eyes were trained on me, unmoving, like he was waiting for something. I was about to get back in my car and drive away when I heard a sound from behind me. Footsteps. I spun around, only to see a figure stepping out from the shadows, a tall man, dressed in a dark coat and a suit, looking almost identical to the first. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. The 2 men were somehow connected. I turned and hurried back to my car, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What was going on? Was I being followed? I got in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I had to keep moving. There was no time to waste. As I drove further down the highway, I tried to push the thoughts of the strange men out of my head. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew that something was wrong. About an hour later, my car suddenly made a strange noise. A low thump. The steering wheel pulled slightly to the side. My heart sank. I pulled off the road and checked my tire. It was flat. I hadn't hit anything, and the tire seemed to have just gone flat out of nowhere. My first thought was to call roadside assistance, but as I fumbled with my phone, I heard it, a distant engine. A truck was coming from behind, but there were no headlights, only the sound of a truck's engine revving. It wasn't until I stepped out of the car to look for the source that I saw it. The same pickup truck from earlier, the one I had noticed at the gas station. It was parked in the dark, a few hundred feet away. I froze, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? The truck's engine suddenly died, and everything went eerily quiet. My instincts screamed at me to hide. I ducked behind a tree and pulled out my phone, dialing 911. I whispered into the phone, my heart pounding as I described my location and the flat tire. I told them I felt like I was being watched, that someone was following me. Just as I spoke, the sound of footsteps grew louder. I looked up and saw the figure, the same man from the rest stop, walking toward me, his eyes scanning the area. I could feel his gaze, cold and calculating. My breath caught in my throat. Was he the one who slashed my tire? I backed further into the bushes, my hands trembling as I clutched my phone. The voice on the other end of the line urged me to stay hidden. Then the line went dead. No, my phone's reception had cut out. The truck engine roared back to life, and I watched in horror as the man in the suit approached my car. He stood there for what felt like an eternity before turning and walking back toward his truck. The truck pulled up next to my car, and I could hear the man's voice calling out to me. Need some help? I remained silent. There was no way I was going to get close to him. I continued to hide in the woods, hoping for a miracle. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone, the truck disappearing into the darkness. Minutes later, another vehicle approached. A car, this time, slowing down as it neared my hiding spot. I could hear voices, two men talking. I crept closer, trying to get a better look. One man was the same one from the truck. He was speaking to another person in a low voice, trying to explain the situation. His story didn't add up. Panicked, I ran into the road, shouting for help. I don't know him. He slashed my tire. Both men turned toward me, but it was the man from the truck who seemed nervous. His eyes darted from me to the other man. Before I could say another word, the man from the truck hurriedly climbed back into his vehicle and sped off, leaving me with the other driver. The other man, a stranger to me, offered to help. He was calm, collected, and promised to take me to town. I reluctantly accepted, still shaken by what had happened. As I climbed into his truck, I couldn't help but feel like I had narrowly escaped something terrible. We made it to a nearby gas station, and moments later, a police car pulled in. I explained the situation to the officer, who promised to check the gas station footage. As I sat there waiting, I began to feel the weight of the entire experience sink in. The man who had offered to help me stayed by my side, and eventually, a tow truck arrived. The officer took my information, and I was left in the hands of the tow driver. But as I glanced back at the gas station, something struck me. The officer never came back. He never called me to follow up. The footage from the gas station? It seemed to have vanished. I never learned the truth about that night, but I'm sure of one thing. Something strange was happening on that lonely highway, and I barely escaped it. Story 2. It was one of those nights when the world felt eerily still. The kind of night where you could almost feel the weight of silence pressing down on everything around you. I was driving through Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, cutting through the empty stretches of road, trying to avoid the city traffic that had started to pile up on the main highways. It was close to midnight by the time I turned off the main route and onto one of the many deserted back roads I preferred. No one ever drove these roads at this hour. It was just me and the dark, quiet trees lining the sides of the road, their branches swaying in the wind. I had been driving for a while, the radio softly playing a podcast I'd heard 100 times, my only company the low hum of my car's engine. The peaceful drive was a welcome change from the hectic day I had. It had been a long, stressful week, and I was just eager to get home. A good 45-minute drive was all that stood between me and the comfort of my own bed. Then came the alert. A soft ding from my car's dashboard pulled me out of my daze. Low fuel. I glanced at the screen and saw that I was running on empty, though I hadn't noticed the dwindling tank. I turned the wheel and adjusted my route, quickly pulling out my phone to check the map for the nearest gas station. There was one a few miles up the road, so I punched the address into my GPS. When I pulled up to the gas station, it was nothing special, just a small, generic place with a weathered sign that looked like it had been there for years. A faded, fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The only other car at the station was an old beater pickup truck parked by the pump. As I got out of my car, I noticed the man filling the truck's gas tank. He glanced up at me, his eyes lingering for a moment before he went back to his task. There was something about the way he looked at me, though, that felt off. I couldn't place it at the time, but it gave me an uneasy feeling. I shrugged it off, figuring he was just another driver stopping to refuel in the middle of nowhere. I went inside the small convenience shop to grab some coffee and pay for the gas. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and I noticed the clerk, a thin man with graying hair, behind the counter, giving me a half-hearted smile. Cold night, he muttered as I made my way to the coffee machine. I nodded, too tired to say much more. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. After paying for my coffee and gas, I headed back outside. The man in the pickup truck was still there, finishing up with the pump. I got in my car and drove off, But as I glanced at the side mirror, I couldn't help but notice that the truck was still there, sitting motionless, like the man was just waiting. It was a strange feeling that washed over me, but again, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just waiting for his car to finish fueling. I refocused on the road ahead, the sound of the engine humming in the background. But that's when the first odd thing happened. About 5 minutes later, I saw the truck again, sitting on the side of the road. The exact same pickup truck from the gas station, parked off to the side near the woods, its engine off. I slowed down, curiosity bubbling up inside me. I glanced over, wondering if maybe the driver had broken down, but no one was in the truck. It was just sitting there in the dark, waiting. I told myself it was probably a coincidence, but a cold shiver ran down my spine as I drove past. The woods were thick here, and there was nothing around for miles. I turned my attention back to the road, telling myself it was all in my head. Minutes later, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic thumping sound coming from my rear tires. I instinctively glanced at the dashboard. Low pressure. One of my tires was flat. How had I not noticed? It wasn't like I had hit anything. I pulled off the road and stopped, my heart starting to race. I got out of the car and walked around to the back. Sure enough, the rear driver's side tire was completely flat. There was no way I could have driven on it much longer without damaging the wheel. With a sigh, I dug through the trunk, looking for the spare tire, but I hadn't even gotten halfway through the process when I heard it again, the unmistakable rumble of an engine. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The sound was coming from behind me, but this time there were no headlights. Just the rumble of an engine, growing louder. I turned around, expecting to see another vehicle. But there was nothing. It was pitch black out there, and I couldn't see a thing. The engine revved, louder now, and I realized it wasn't just some random passing car. The sound was coming closer. Panic set in. I turned to check my surroundings and saw the faintest glow in the distance. The pickup truck. The same truck from the gas station was slowly rolling toward me. My instincts told me to run, but I stayed still, too terrified to move. The truck stopped a few yards away, the headlights glaring toward my car. It didn't move. It just sat there, idling. A voice broke the silence. "You need help." I looked over, my breath shallow, and saw the man from the gas station. He was standing outside his truck now, his figure illuminated by the headlights. He looked eerily calm, almost too calm for someone who had just driven into a remote area in the middle of nowhere. His expression was blank, emotionless. It sent chills down my spine. "No thanks," I said, forcing myself to sound confident, though my voice trembled. There was something wrong here. I could feel it deep in my gut. Without waiting for a response, I turned back to my car, ready to lock myself in and drive away. But before I could move, I heard the truck door slam shut. My stomach lurched. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I looked up in time to see the truck's headlights dim, and then the sound of the engine revved again. This time, it was different. The truck backed up slowly, pulling out of view and into the trees, vanishing as if it had never been there. I sat in my car for a few moments, my mind racing. What was going on? I didn't dare get out to check if the truck was still there. The eerie feeling in my gut told me that whatever was happening wasn't safe. I started the car and drove off quickly, not daring to look back. My heart was pounding in my chest as I accelerated, hoping to get as far away from that truck as possible. For the next few miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something wasn't right. I pulled over at the next town, shaking. I filled up on gas at a well-lit station, trying to calm myself down. When I was ready to continue, I finally drove off, my nerves still on edge. But as I approached the turnoff to my destination, I glanced into the rearview mirror once more. The truck was behind me, following me. Just a few yards away, its headlights burning bright in the night. Only this time, there was no sign of the driver. The truck was empty, its engine still running. I floored the accelerator, my hands shaking as I sped up, trying to distance myself from the eerie vehicle. My heart raced as I tried to outrun it, but no matter how fast I went, the truck stayed behind, silently tailing me in the rearview. Just when I thought I was about to lose it, I hit a sharp bend in the road. I glanced in the mirror one last time, and the truck was gone. Completely gone. There was no sign of it, as if it had vanished into thin air. I pulled into a parking lot at a gas station and sat there, shaking uncontrollably. I hadn't seen that truck again since. To this day, I don't know what happened, but I never take the back roads alone at night anymore. The memories still haunt me. Some part of me wonders if I'll ever really know the truth about that pickup truck, or if it was just something I imagined. But deep down, I know what I saw. And I know I wasn't alone on that road that night. Story 3. It was the kind of drive I hated. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy sheets, and my car wasn't exactly built for it. My 2009 Hyundai Sonata wasn't the most reliable vehicle to handle a winter storm, but it was all I had. I was on my way to visit Todd, my boyfriend, who lived in a small town a few hours away. We didn't see each other much since we lived in different states, but we made it work. Tonight, I was on my way up to spend the weekend with him, but the weather had other plans. The snowstorm had worsened over the past couple of hours, and it didn't look like it was going to let up anytime soon. I had hoped I could make it through before the worst of the storm hit, but as I ventured further north, the visibility became almost non-existent. My windshield wipers could barely keep up with the intensity of the snow, and I had to slow down considerably. The roads were slick, and I was nervous. Every now and then, I could feel my car swaying slightly as I tried to maintain control. By the time I reached the outskirts of the town, it was nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead of me. The wind howled, rattling the trees, and the snow piled up quickly on the roads. I knew I had to stop for the night, but the problem was there was no place to stop. The area was desolate, nothing but barren fields, dark roads, and occasional clusters of trees. The few buildings I had passed seemed abandoned, and I didn't trust them enough to park my car for the night. At a small diner, I decided to take a break. It was a cozy little place, the type of greasy spoon diner you would expect to find in the middle of nowhere. I pulled in and parked, the snow starting to accumulate on the windshield as I climbed out. The door chimed as I entered, and I was greeted by the warmth of the place, the smell of coffee and frying food hitting my senses immediately. Behind the counter, the waitress was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who gave me a concerned smile when she saw my state. "You're out on the roads in this weather?" she asked, her voice sounding almost disapproving. I didn't want to turn back, I replied, shivering slightly from the cold. "But it's really coming down out there. I think I need to stop for the night." She nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You'll need to find somewhere nearby. A motel about 5 minutes up the road should be open. It's right off the main highway, just past the snowplow's turnoff. You can't miss it." I gave her a nod of gratitude before ordering a quick sandwich and coffee. After a short while, I paid and left the diner. My car was completely covered in snow now, and I quickly brushed it off, getting in and pulling away. The diner's parking lot was empty when I left, and the snow had accumulated at least an inch on the ground. I found the motel in no time. It was an old, run-down place, its lights flickering slightly in the storm. The parking lot was half full, and the snow wasn't plowed yet, which made it feel all the more desolate. I parked my car, gathered my things, and walked inside. The motel's lobby was small and dimly lit, with an old carpet that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes. Behind the counter, an elderly man greeted me with a nod. "A room for the night?" he asked, his voice raspy but not unfriendly. I nodded, telling him I just needed a place to rest for the night. I was so tired, and the snowstorm wasn't letting up. He handed me a key, mumbling something about staying warm. The room was on the ground floor, and he mentioned it was one of the few rooms still available. As I walked back outside, the wind picked up, whipping the snow around me. The air felt cold enough to freeze my breath. I hurried back to the car, grabbed my suitcase, and walked to my room, quickly locking the door behind me once I was inside. The room was small but not unpleasant. It had a queen-sized bed, a red carpet that looked as though it hadn't been cleaned in years, and walls decorated with wallpaper that looked straight out of the 1970s. There was a single window that looked out into the snowy parking lot, but it wasn't much to look at. The television in the corner was old, but I didn't feel like watching anything. I needed rest more than anything. I unpacked my things, plugged in my phone, and tried to FaceTime Todd, but the reception was terrible. The Wi-Fi was spotty too, and it took several attempts before I was able to get through. Todd seemed just as concerned about the snowstorm, and we exchanged a few texts while I ate the sandwich I'd gotten at the diner. The snow continued to fall outside, and soon enough, I started to feel sleepy. The warmth of the room, combined with the exhaustion of the drive, was starting to take its toll. I turned off the lights and lay down on the bed, trying to get some sleep. The sound of the storm outside, the wind howling against the walls, was strangely comforting. I felt myself drifting off, my eyes heavy, when suddenly I heard something. It was the bathroom door. It had creaked. My eyes snapped open. Had I left the bathroom door open? I couldn't remember. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The room was still, except for the faint howling of the wind. But that sound, it had been the bathroom door. Was it just the wind? Was it something else? I texted Todd about it, telling him I was freaked out by the creak. He asked me if I was sure I had locked the door. I froze. Had I locked the door? I didn't remember. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and walked to the bathroom door. It was shut tight. I exhaled in relief, but the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I checked the rest of the room, peeking into the closet, checking under the bed, and making sure all the windows were locked. Nothing seemed out of place. I tried to shake it off and lay back down, but I couldn't. I felt like something wasn't right. It wasn't until I heard the sound of footsteps outside the room that I really started to panic. I jumped up again and rushed to the window. I could barely make out the outlines of cars in the snow, but one thing stood out. There was a car parked at the far end of the parking lot, the headlights dimmed, and the engine idling. I hadn't seen it when I arrived. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to that car. The snow had made everything eerily quiet, and I strained to see any sign of life. Then I saw it, the figure. A man, sitting in the car. He was just staring straight ahead, not moving. I turned back to the room and locked the door, my heart pounding. There was something about this whole situation that felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone here. I quickly texted Todd again, telling him about the man in the car, but as I looked back out the window, the car was gone. It had vanished. There was no sign of it, no headlights, no movement. I convinced myself it had been nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, there was a knock on the door. I froze. Who could it be? It was the middle of the night, and I hadn't seen anyone come to the motel when I arrived. I hesitated, too scared to answer, but then there was another knock, this one louder. I grabbed the phone, ready to call the front desk, but before I could, the knocking stopped. There was silence for a long while. I waited, unsure of what to do. Should I open the door? Should I call for help? Just when I thought it was safe, I heard a soft, almost inaudible sound from the hallway. A door opening. Someone walking. I cautiously peered through the peephole in the door, but I saw nothing. No one was there. I exhaled deeply, my nerves on edge. It wasn't until I checked my phone that I saw the final message from Todd. I called the motel and asked about your room. The guy at the desk said he's not seen you. You're not there. I froze, staring at the screen. I hadn't left the room. I hadn't stepped outside. But someone else had been inside with me.